midst of the Texas Freedom Network. I was asked to review the textbook. Since I have a strong specialty in early 1800s, I decided to work with other historians to review the content of the textbook and give our ideas, and our evaluations of the quality of the content that was inside. Two of the professors that I worked with have already returned their reviews, as well as mine. They were John McKiernan Gonzalez from Texas State University, and Dr. Bill Lopez, Emeritus Professor from the University of Nebraska. There are other people involved, but until they themselves turn in their review, I haven't mentioned them just yet. Instead of talking about what we all pretty much agree upon in regards to the quality of this textbook, I thought I'd spend some time giving you some examples of the mistakes that have been done historically. So myself and Dr. Gonzalez had looked through chapters 2 through 5, basically aligning to the type of historical specialty that we have. So let's begin with some of the wonderful gems that we got from this. Okay? One of the things that I would say we agree upon is that there is a very deliberate effort. And I don't know how, let me see, let me look at how Dr. Gonzalez says. He likes to say that there is a contentious way of presenting it, of presenting the history of Mexican Americans in a way that sort of builds up the idea that of creating this idea of the inferiority of Mexican Americans, which is kind of obvious, if you really pay attention to what's being put in there. Now let me give you some of the examples that we have right here. For instance, on page 108, when they talk about the Mexican independence movement, and they talk about the capture of Miguel Hidalgo. And they make this, it's a tiny mistake, but it's about, they talk about him being captured near the U.S. border. Well, the U.S. border was 600 miles away from where he was captured. I mean, this is a tiny mistake that many people would point, but I'm like, how did they make that type of mistake? I mean, he was captured in Coahuila, 600 miles away from what was recognized as a border. This is the type of mistake that wouldn't get passed in a normal textbook, okay? Now, I will also point out something very important here. How important do you think is the Mexican independence movement to the story? Yet, the section dealing with José María Morelos y Pavón, who basically was one of the most consequential leaders, only fills one small paragraph in the entire section. They also use wonderful language like the period from 1850 to 1821 to make it seem that the Mexican independence movement was just a terrorist action. What is it setting up the Mexicans who are fighting for their independence? Basically setting them up as morally vacuous agents. Okay? The other part that really disturbs us is, if this is supposed to be about Mexican Americans, why did they spend an inordinate amount of time talking about events in Peru, events in Cuba, events in Puerto Rico, events in Argentina? Apparently the authors don't know the difference between a Mexican and other groups of people. Okay? It would be like if let's say in Boston, they did an Irish American Studies textbook and they're talking about Australians. Just because they speak English too. And I love this. At 110, the point that I'm making here. Looting, burning, and sacking of cities. That's what they say that these guerrilla groups trying to get their independence were doing. And it essentially reduces the war during that period to a crime. Without even discussing the tactics used by the Spaniards, which were fairly terroristic themselves. I mean, like one of the people pointed out here, I'm amazed they have not explicitly said that how dare the darkies ask for equality from the master. I mean, it comes down to something that is just a joke. Now, for those of you who do Texas history, who know something about Texas history, the person who wrote the section of Texas history would fail a 4th grade exam. I mean, they don't mention the empresario movement and everything that happened. And apparently, according to them, the corpse of Moses Austin was still around in 1821, arranging things. I mean, these are mistakes that just on the level of paying attention to the details tell you that these persons don't really know what they're talking about. Okay? One of my other favorites, let me see. Sorry, it's a long list. As people say, mistakes are abundant, so it takes a while to go through all of them. One of my favorite things, they conveniently sidestepped the fact that when the Texas Declaration of Independence was signed, the vast majority of the signers were essentially illegal. I mean, they had no legal standing to sign it. Okay? There was a certain number of signers, and only 10 of them had lived in Texas more than 6 years. You know, the law of April 6, 1830 made the entrance of Americans into Texas, people from the United States, illegal. So anything that comes afterwards, they don't have legal standing. But of course, that's a very uncomfortable thing to talk about, especially from people who probably are not in favor of illegal immigration themselves today. They don't want to deal with the reality of something historically where the situation was reversed. Okay? Another wonderful gem right here is that Santa Anna actually marched his troops from the Rio Grande all the way to San Antonio in 4 days. In other words, their knowledge of the Battle of the Alamo is the battle. They don't realize there's a siege way before that. They also don't realize that Santa Anna wasn't leading the only troops effectively, that there were other troops sweeping the Texas coast. So here's another wonderful little gem from them. And they say, oh yeah, Santa Anna led his troops at Goliad. Well, he was nowhere near Goliad. That was José Herrera. You got to give him credit for what he did. I mean, these are mistakes that on a 4th grade textbook, I would fail a kid. And I used to be a 4th grade teacher for many years. And I can assure you, these are facts that we used to teach. Okay? Let me see. One of the things they don't really talk about is they sidestepped the long history of active American efforts to obtain Texas diplomatically, even before the Texas Revolution. I myself, first of all, I'm an expert on Joel Roberts Poinsett, who was the first American ambassador sent to Mexico. He was actually called plenipotentiary. But I also know a lot about John Quincy Adams and their efforts, and I can assure you this is a long and rich history. I can even show you the exact letter where Poinsett writes back to John Quincy Adams after realizing the Mexicans have no intention of ceding Texas and said, let's just encourage illegal immigration into the state. Soon they'll have so many people from the United States, we'll just take it from them. But of course, it's not the type of detail they like to focus upon. Okay? It's legions, and I want to turn to my colleague, John McKiernan Gonzalez's points, because he is an even more eloquent historian than I would ever be. And I'd like to just give you some of the highlights. He did his work on Chapter 5, which is essentially the post-Civil War era. In this, let me point out what he wrote. There are no Mexican Americans quoted in the chapter. Apparently, we had nothing to say in that era. The only extended primary sources quoted in the chapter on the U.S. are from Mark Twain, Alexis de Tocqueville, and Abraham Lincoln. I guess all of them are ordinary Chicanos. The text does not mention any Mexican-American women. I don't know. Yeah, you guys said? Anyway, there are no women cited or quoted in the entire chapter. The chapter on the U.S. features 2 Latinos, Antonio Coronel, a California landowner and gold miner, and Francisco Rosales, a Chilean gold miner who becomes a politician in Chile. Again, we come that. They don't know the difference between a Mexican and a Chilean. Okay? The chapter names 3 American Latinos, the 2 above, and 1 who may be an imaginary one, Francis Coronel. The only peer-reviewed scholarship cited is a book published in China on Chinese laborers in the making of the railroad. It has little to do with the content of that particular section. In a 45-page chapter, now listen to this, there are only 2 pages of content. that relate directly to Mexican Americans. This report is very well detailed and well written by my colleague. I suggested you read it so that you really look at what he writes. Okay? I will close now because it's time for somebody else, but thank you very much.